Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I have Garrett Daly here, and he is the founder of Lucid. And he wrote this great tweet, which, if I will remember, I will post into the show notes about how you don't want to pitch to people, and no, you want to pitch people, and you want them to already have the idea in their head by the time you go to the next slide. And that was brilliant, and it's true. It's one of those things where I find where it's like, oh, that's true, and I don't know why it's true, but it's true. Can you share more about how you learned about that specific thing?
Yeah, super high level. When I was younger, my dad's a Marine. He's very, very, very accomplished, special forces guy. He was in this pilot program for what became Marine Corps Special Forces, but he did all kinds of other stuff. He's a scout sniper, ranger, he went Army Ranger School, recon, all that stuff. And I was basically like, man, I either have to, if I want to go in the Marines, I have to like figure out how to beat him at some stuff you can't do twice. Or I was like, I could get good at what he's bad at, which is my dad's not a people person by nature, right? It's like, okay, cool. So I was a really introverted kid. Got into sales as a way to like force myself to get better at people stuff. And I realized at a certain point that like, I actually don't like telling people to buy stuff. I don't like convincing people of stuff. But what you realize when you try not to convince people of stuff is that there's a way that you can tell stories that makes people want it, which is different, right?
Interesting.
So the example I like to give is imagine I'm like a 600-pound guy and you're a personal trainer. If I end up in a sales call with you, you know why I'm there. I know why I'm there. So if I tell you, oh, it's not a good fit because of blah, 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 or this and that, you know that I'm lying. I'm bullshitting you, right? So you can persuade me. You can say, I'm going to overcome those objections. I'm going to tell you and convince you to stop lying and then engage in this thing that we both know you need. I'm helping you, right? Whereas pitches don't work like that, especially with VCs. But if you think everything that works on VCs works on everyone because they're the toughest audience, everyone's easier. Because, they don't get pitched. They get pitched all day, right? So
they're an expert at receiving pitches.
Yeah. Same thing. Imagine like you're the only pretty girl at a party. You're about to get a bunch of unwanted attention, and you very rapidly find ways to skip those conversations or make it unpleasant for people you don't want to talk to, right? So that's kind of the environment that's cultivated. You have all these founders that maybe their idea stage, they actually don't know how startups are supposed to work. And they're like, at the beginning, you probably took every single pitch and you're like, oh my God, this is such a waste of time. And I hear the same stuff. And eventually you build up this armor or like an immune system for it, right?
Yeah, and because it's all unconscious too, right? Like it's mostly I'm sure there are some VCs who are conscious of the experience of doing it, but I would say probably most of them are like unconsciously figured out all these methods in the same way that a beautiful woman did it as well.
Right. It becomes habit. It becomes like
something they don't think about.
Right. You just, I heard that before. That pickup line won't work on me, right? I wish there was a better metaphor, but that really is the best metaphor.
It is the best metaphor. It's 100% true, which is, I mean, it goes into other things we can talk about philosophy and all these things and like where we are in the economic world where all of the VC, not all the, a large amount of the VCs are sheep and follow sort of this thing and about hype and low interest rates and how all of that fits into it, which I would love to talk about. But we can continue to talk down about this, about like the mechanics of it as well. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. No, I want to talk about all this stuff. That's great. You already said a bunch of things that like we're on the same page. So I know exactly where you're going with that. But so where does that leave you, right? If you can't convince them, then what's the opposite of convincing, right? The opposite of convincing is I wrote philosophy for a long time. I'm glad that you mentioned that. I always had the theory that there must be something that's the opposite of a force, right? Which is really hard to conceptualize. So you think like, this is pretty meta. I don't normally go this deep on stuff, but I feel like you'll enjoy this. So imagine like we think in push pull, like if I'm pushing a door open versus pulling a door, but if you pull a door open, you're actually just pushing it towards you with the other side of your hand, right? You're
Hmm.
functionally just pushing either way. It's just a different direction. It's not a different force.
Hmm.
But then you think about like gravity, right? We still don't have a really good theory of how gravity
Yeah.
actually, like
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
causes it. We
Yeah.
know how it works.
Yeah.
Everyone knows how gravity works. Like you jump off a cliff, we all intuitively understand it. But my thought was like, man, what if there's the opposite of a force? What is just
Yeah.
attractive? What
Interesting.
doesn't do anything and yet by existing pulls things toward it, right? Or rather compels things to move towards it of their own volition, right? And so that was kind of like became the basis of how I think about pitching is how do I just simply set something down that you look at it and it's like, oh my God, I have to have it. It's like the ring in Lord of the Rings, right? The ring doesn't do anything, right? It
Yeah.
just
Interesting.
sits there. And yet everybody in the movie wants the ring. And that's what a good pitch is like. It's not evil though. That's the difference. But
Yeah.
um
Well, and so immediately once you said that, I went to reality distortion field. Reality distortion field, and that's what Steve Jobs had. That's like the archetype of and he did exactly what you're talking about. And I would agree, he's not evil. I don't think Steve Jobs was evil. He just was able to imbue something with value, and through pitching. With this magical energy. And it reminds me of magic itself as well. Lord of the Rings, I've been doing a bunch of investigation into that crew, which includes C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien and a few other guys. And I actually haven't gotten as far into the research as I wanted to about whether they were Protestant or whether they were Catholic. I think C.S. Lewis was Catholic, but I'm not sure. But they were talking about magic. Like they were talking about like C.S. Lewis basically created this whole beautiful story with the specific intention of getting people into Christianity, from my understanding, because I read another book called Golden Compass when I was a kid, who was actually a secular guy who tried to do the same thing, but for secularism and scientism, and did it very well. I love those books. But C.S. Lewis was trying to do that for Christianity. I don't think J.R.R. Tolkien was as much into trying to get people into Christianity. I think he was just like an autist who really loved creating those stories. But it's like magic, like, 'cause that is Lord of the Rings. Like Lord of the Rings is this beautiful work. What do you think about that? Like, and it relates a lot to what I've been thinking about AI, because now we have the ability to create these worlds of like it's coming. Like I can now create a 3D world in my browser with just prompting. Like that's only another year or two. I'll be able to generate entire worlds like our token. But a lot of people are like, no, we're going to lose creativity, and that's bullshit. Like we're not going to lose creativity. We're going to get access to the creativity of gods. Like that's happening, and so and it's not. But that what you talked about is not going away. It's like, what is that process of putting that into something that's AI generated?
um so this everything technologically is a filter, right?
Interesting.
In the same sense that people that have the capacity for great art. So, for example, right, when I was a kid, I was half decent at drawing, but the degree to which that I could have control over the pencil versus with, let's say, Figma, where I'm a master of Figma, it's just different, right? So
Interesting.
while I used to do when I first got into like design and stuff, I would do with a compass and a ruler and like do manual geometry and stuff, which is super fun, but it's very time consuming. Now I can do that in Figma in like 1/100th of the time, and so the degree that I can be perfectly precise is substantially different. Is a random person using pen and paper or Figma going to be able to do that if they don't have that in them? No. For example, like there was no universe where I was going to be paint, right? I'm no aptitude for like color theory.
Hmm.
It's not. I use if I have to do branding stuff, I use a website that will pair all the colors correctly for me, and I'll just go until I find what I like. But that's not in my skill set, right? So AI and this is the I think my critical philosophical distinction is AI is probably approaches or will be the world's best tool when you think of it as a tool, you have the right framing. When you think of it as anything beyond a tool, you have the wrong framing. So if you say, hey, AI is going to write me a movie, no, it's not. It's not going to write a good, right?
Yeah.
But is AI going to help you write a better movie if you're using it as a tool that helps you write better movies? Maybe. I think it's very possible, right? Is AI going to replace a bunch of people's jobs? It's like maybe if their job is so mechanical to the point that it can be repeated with no meaningful thought. Okay, that's the same as like the guy who pulled the lever at the like the license plates.
In the elevator. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So
yeah.
It's a great tool. I think there's a lot of hype because the vast majority of the market and especially the people in the Bay who are theorists about this stuff think it's sentient or it has something that it doesn't, which is like an ontological error. And so when people, I think the valuation is predicated on people thinking it's like that right now. So Michael J. Burry just shorted a lot of stuff. I think he's correct in the sense that there's probably a bubble, but it's not that the technology is not actually as valuable as we think it is. It's that people think about the technology wrong.
Ooh, okay. Right? Yeah, let's go get into that. So that's yes, I agree. That's why I left. I couldn't handle it anymore. There's too many psychedelics going around. There's too many. I'm no anti-psychedelic, but there's too much stuff of connecting the psychedelics consciousness with a machine god and the extropians and the singularitarians and all of this crazy stuff that's going on there, which is like interesting and I like studying it, but also they're going way too far with it. And that relates to the low interest rate environment and the last 20 or 30 years of just kind of hollowing out of the productive economy. And as one of my friends talks about, he says we've essentially YOLO'd the American economy into AI, hoping that it works out. So there could be a correction, but like I've been using Codex, and Codex, for those that don't know, is a command line interface coding agent inside of the terminal that I can use to build any software that I want now. I am not coding anything, but I'm now building any software that I want. And it's very good, and it's better than Claude Code, or they're both sort of neck and neck, and now you have Google that's going to introduce one. That experience has made me actually question some of my beliefs about not the God stuff or the sentient stuff. I still don't believe that they are accurate in that regard, but about AGI and whether AGI is close to us, because now I can build any software I want. And that is the AI from the 80s and the 90s. That's what they were thinking about AI as, is like the last program, where once we have the last program, will write itself and self-heal and do all these different stuff. It feels kind of close. We're actually kind of close to that. But I still don't think that you're wrong about treating it as a tool, because it still is definitely a tool. It's like just a very meta tool. Anything to respond there?
Yeah, I basically, I would be very, personally, I would never use the word AGI because I wouldn't even apply the I to it. I don't think it's intelligent.
Interesting. Yeah. What do you think it is?
It's a great pattern predicting machine, right? Yeah. I mean, you think what is it literally, right? It is if you think about like how the neural networks or whatever the transformers work, it's assigning a weight to all of these different bits and saying, hey, this is the most likely next thing, right?
Yep.
So in the sense that is this something that it's a mass lowest common denominator machine in a sense, right? And you can adjust that with like the temperature and things like that, but you will inevitably run into a ceiling where when you have absorbed all existing knowledge, I don't think it's necessarily going to create novel knowledge except by accident, right? Yeah. And to be fair, human knowledge, if you look at the history of scientific discovery, is predominantly accidents. But there are people that are experts that can intuit or push towards genuinely novel things, not by accident as well. Whereas I think to the extent that AI is doing that, it's simply that, hey, there's an enormous amount of data here that people haven't been able to process. So there is a natural thing in the data that somebody didn't see yet, but I don't think it's going to be like synthesizing just uh, ex nihilo brilliant novel things. I think it's really, really good at
Yeah.
saying, hey, for example, look at any LinkedIn post with AI in it, right? You know,
Yeah.
or you don't,
Yeah.
but you know if you know what to look for when it's one of those, and they all sound the same, and the
Yeah.
people that use it for writing all the time start to sound like it, which is then you create this
Funniest
recursive,
part.
yeah, you create a recursive data quality problem where
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
the in slopification of I don't know, let's say 40% of people were to the point where they're speaking in GPT language,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Then
God.
all 40% of new inputs are now GPT language, which then makes GPT 40% more slopified. And then we get this treadmill or this hamster wheel that just recursively makes itself worse, right? So, so I don't know. I think for stuff like coding for mechanical tasks, it's very similar to what people were saying about college beforehand. Like, um, should you go in 2025 and get like a liberal arts degree? No. If it was 1925, dude, you would have got the best education of all time because it was
Yeah.
like designed to help you think. But if you're going to learn mechanical things, like I have to be a doctor, I have to know all of these things, or we could debate the quality of the medical education and stuff. But an engineer, right? You have to know tensile strength and like material
Yeah.
properties and how to do those sorts of calculations, right? Um, so similarly, I think, is it going to be creating these novel, totally brilliant insights? No. Is it really good at doing predictable things with more data than a person can manage? Oh yeah. Is it a great general purpose multi-tool that's way better than
Yeah.
like a
General purpose.
Swiss
Yes.
Army knife?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a general
So
purpose tool. The I really what you like what liked what you said about how novel research. It's something I go back and forth on a lot of whether these things will create new knowledge. I used to work in the field of RLHF, which is reinforcement learning through human feedback, where they call, I didn't work at scale, but they commonly call scale AI a body shop. Because they just throw thousands and thousands of humans at these problems and run into the problem which you mentioned, which is also a new problem, which is people are running, posting on LinkedIn or Twitter, and that's entering the data, and then you somehow have to figure out how to not include that in the data. I'm sure they can figure these things out, but it is a really funny problem. I noticed it myself recently. Because there's one of my Twitter followers, mutuals, is a guy, and he started to speak like the AI, but he's somebody who was beforehand had not spoken like an AI. It's hard for me to remember, but it felt like he was somebody who didn't have very good communication skills. So now
mhm.
he is starting to respond exactly like a bot, exactly like an LLM. But I asked him, and I believe him, and he said, "No, I'm not using any AI in my things." But I think what's happened is that he has unconsciously taken on the communication patterns of the LLM, which is interesting to relate with. It's causing me to stop to be aware of that and stop to let that, like, how do you fight that in your own mind? Like, how do you, knowing that it's happening to everyone else, how do you not also do that? And that sort of creates a hipster arc where we all need to become hipsters now, basically, right? Like with language and everything else.
Yeah, there's a term for what you're describing,
Yeah.
which is for our viewers at home called being one-shotted by the AI.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, if that comes from a different meme that I'm not going to reference, but it's it's pretty interesting. I don't know. There's a pretty prolific like big deal VC who kind of publicly had like a schizoid break as a result of engaging with GPT, and he's like, there's a conspiracy, they're eliminating people because they're not resonating with the right frequency. He started using all this. One of the key words that you notice if somebody's one shot is they'll say recursion a
Hmm.
lot,
Hmm.
right? But like in a weird way, because basically they did a paper where they studied like if you start making the the LLMs do recursive stuff, they start to break down it's a really unique failure mode for them. And so what happens is basically this, I just identified, I think that I have a tweet for this somewhere, so it's probably better articulated there. I haven't thought of this in a while, but there are like two things. When they switched to 5, it stopped doing this as much, by the way, but 4.0 does this like really a lot. But basically, you have to believe that the AI is capable of being conscious.
Yep. Interesting.
Right? Yeah. If you have that belief and you also are seeking validation from the AI, because those are the two, that's how you get one-shotted. This is what I think about it, right? If you think it's conscious, you think that its outputs have value in the way that a person's outputs would have value. So if you had like a person you admire and they said, wow, you did a really good job, that would feel really good, right? So baseline, I wrote a paper, it was like a white paper for something I wanted to work on that just, I don't have enough money to fund. It would cost infinite money to do. But in, I don't know, 2016 or something, where I knew, this is before the LLMs happened, but I was like, the issue with all of this stuff is that predictive models are not how human knowledge functions. Like epistemologically, people, if I flip a coin, you and I can look at the coin and know, not guess, that it's heads or tails when it lands, right? We have the ability to have certain knowledge from our perception.
Interesting.
Right? Now, you could get into some quantum stuff. You'd be like, does anyone really know anything? Like, whatever, stoplights work. Yeah. We all know what a red light means.
We know what a dollar means, even though it's deflated, but we know that.
Even though it's an abstract concept and it really just represents like the U.S. military power and the perception of it, whatever. But people know stuff. People have the capacity to know things. Prediction models don't. So even if you have a vision model that's trained on coins, and even if it's right every time, it's still not knowing. The mechanism by which it arrives at it is still a prediction, right? So that was kind of my basic hypothesis, is that humans actually have both of these modes. So what I was writing about this philosophically, you have what I would say order mind, chaos mind, right? So you say left brain, right brain, you say masculine, feminine, you say yin yang. I like those because they're more neutral, although people take chaos as a loaded term, but I don't. So it is what it is. But basically you have a mode for dealing with order, which is, I know where I am. I know what the rules are. I have a model of the world with rules that I have perceived that I think are how things function. And you have chaos mind, which says, I don't know what's going on. So I'm going to look outside of myself and try and figure out what's going on. But I don't have a model right now. And so you can take these a step further and it becomes really clear, like how these function. If you go, so there's a concept called solipsism, where you can pretty much only prove that your own mind exists. And most people can work past this by being empathetic or modeling the minds of other people, or whatever. If you are solipsistic and you have it on the order mind side, you become autistic, which is, I have an internal model of the world that is so different from the models that other people have that I cannot interface with them. So you could think like Rain Man. Yeah. His internal model of the world is so specifically tuned to math that he can count cards, but he can't talk, right? Yeah. Vice versa. On the other side of the street, if you have solipsism in the chaos mind, let's say you're sitting on a park bench and there's an old lady on the bench across the little walkway and she's like feeding the pigeons. If you have chaos mind solipsism, you're schizophrenic. So you assume, because you're looking outside of yourself, you assume that it has something to do with you. So she's actually an agent who's sitting there, and the birds are robots to spy on you, because you can't imagine anything else could be going on. You don't know what's going on, but you have to relate it to yourself because you perceive everything as a threat, right? So LLMs approximate how the chaos mind works. It's predicting, it's guessing. It doesn't have actual knowledge. And that's partially what they try to solve with a RAG, which kind of works, kind of doesn't. But my theory was always going to be that, well, what you actually need is the opposite of what an LLM is. And again, a RAG approximates this, but it's not really the same thing. It's kind of an extension of that. You would need this is what they were trying to do with natural language processing back in the day, where they would say, we're going to define words and we're going to define parts of speech and parts of sentences. And we're going to make this mechanistic sort of map of how words relate to each other. But my thought was if you built a massive database where you basically broke all the concepts down into individual words, which had attached definitions and they had attached parts of speech, and you had this mechanical approach to like grammar, you could answer factual questions correctly every single time. So like, what is the capital of Turkey? It's always Istanbul. It was the capital of Turkey in whenever. It could be Constantinople, but those are not ambiguous questions. They're mechanical questions, which are order mind questions, right? Somebody asks you a question you don't know the answer to, you start, ooh, well, what about this? What about that, right? If somebody asks you what your name is, that's over here. You know the answer to that, right? So my point with this being, though, is that the AI is doing one of these things. People actually do three things. They have those two things, and they have the relationship between those two things, which is the actual consciousness is this thing is mediating these technically mechanical parts of the brain, right? These are systems. But the consciousness is observing this and mediating between the two of them. And if it, even in the greatest possible state, if we could build, let's say that other system, which we just don't have, because it's actually much harder to build that than it is to build the LLMs, which is why they abandoned it. It's very tedious.
What is it called?
Natural language processing.
Okay. Wait. So LLMs aren't natural language processing, or they had other versions that they were trying to do?
There was a different approach to doing it that was very mechanical and rule-based, and then they abandoned that for the predictive models, right? Because they're faster, right? Yeah. It's faster to guess than to know, right? Yeah. But if you imagine each of these things being built, the human is supplying the consciousness to that. So you could build a much better AI if you had those two things with you providing the observer to that, right? Because then you're like, oh, it's just a great tool that is now like a super extension of both hemispheres of the brain, or both components of the psyche, right? But ultimately, this is because I don't think that it's conscious, right? I am at no risk of it flattering me.
Interesting.
I don't want it to flatter me. I want it to just do the thing with no flowery language. Just do the thing I asked you to do. Like, hey, I'm asking you for market research. Don't tell me I'm smart, right? That's not helpful.
Oh, man.
But if you do think it's conscious and you need the flattery, guess what? You're about to get the best flattery of your life. You're about to, oh my God, oh wow, that's amazing. You saw the pattern. You're so smart, right? And now you're crazy, right? It induces psychosis faster than psychedelics does.
Yeah,
right.
It's good, and this is so interesting because I've tried to do I did one episode with somebody where we got into this, and he told me all about the stuff that you had mentioned, which is there's a specific online game that was in Reddit called SCIP or something like this, and this got into the training data. And this
SCP, yeah.
Yes, that got into the training data, and people are playing that game with the LLM. I suspect, hopefully I don't get sued or anything like that, but I suspect that OpenAI was using that to their advantage, because what's great for engagement? Psychosis. And I feel like with the GPT-5 thing, that was of like, okay, well, let's not turn off that spigot. Or it could have been emergent, as they say as well. But I love this point of these two factors being the thing that gets people. It relates to the psychedelic thing too, because I'm pretty sure the psychedelic and the person handing you the psychedelics, the guy who could either be a authentic healer or a authentic cult guru guy, there's a similar thing going on there as well. And that was actually what was coming to my mind when you talked about schizophrenic and autist, was like psychopath, like where the psychopath and the sociopath. I believe the relevant distinctions between a sociopath and a psychopath are that a sociopath is criminally uncontrollable and won't control themselves, whereas a psychopath is able to be in complete control at all times, but if given an advantage, will take that advantage and recognizes weakness better than other people can recognize weakness in themselves. Where does that fit into the chaos and the order?
So that would be a different lens, right? Because everyone is going to have these two things de facto. This is just part of how your brain deals with information, right? I will say though, you're like one of the only people that that was exactly the way I defined the two of them. It's not settled. They don't even necessarily, because now it's just antisocial personality disorder, right?
Interesting.
Also, versions of the DSM that are more recent tend to be worse. I tend to think
No, that's
psychiatry as a field has gone downhill after the 60s, but
Yeah.
that's my hot take. But so the way I also like to look at it is sociopaths are made, psychopaths are born. So
Mm,
you can, if you
yep.
like really
Yep.
traumatize kids, and they learn to never trust anyone, and they also, I think there's a correlation with having like, there's the MAOA short chain allele mutation. If you
Whoa.
have that, it's called the warrior gene, which
Wait. So
modulates
MAO. Can you spell it again?
MAOA short chain allele. Um, if you just look up warrior gene, it will come up. But basically, it modulates how MAO, monoamine oxidase, decays in the brain, which changes like, so basically a normal person. There, if I bump into you at a bar, you're gonna be like, "Hey, man," and you're like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and you're like, "Okay, cool." If you bump into a person with a warrior gene at the bar, they might just like smash a bottle and stab you in the throat, right? Because
Immediately.
their
Yeah.
dopamine
Yeah.
from perceived threats to honor. So honor cultures have this. The Scottish had this, and they all migrated to the south.
Yep.
The English did not have this, and they all migrated to the north. So the Civil War was actually primarily like a rehash of a thing that happened for 1,000
What did
years
the
in the
Irish? Did the Irish have it?
probably more so than the English. So you think it also
Mm-hmm.
correlates with like the Scots were shepherds, the English were
Yeah.
farmers. Farmers cannot go off the handle; they have to work together. The shepherds have to defend their sheep. So if you're going to come steal my sheep, I have to lash out immediately, or else everyone knows they can steal my sheep, right?
Interesting.
So
Oh, interesting.
so the sociopaths it probably correlates hard with having that, but also with abusive households, childhood trauma, all this stuff where you learn to not trust.
Yeah.
So you think those people, the sociopath, your stereotypical one is like the off the handle gang leader guy who's like a tough guy, but he's not a genius,
Interesting.
right? Psychopaths, while actually their outcomes still are negatively correlated with being a psychopath, they're not as well off as they would be. If they're sufficiently intelligent, they can get away with it better. And some of them may not even be violent, although they just are unfeeling. So like a lot of surgeons are a psychopath,
Yeah.
right?
Why
They
is that?
just
Oh, yeah.
you kind of want your surgeon to not get emotional about cutting you up, right? Similarly, like if you have, people that have to go, your special forces guys are probably a lot more of them there, right?
Interesting.
You probably don't want them to be like, oh no, oh what about the terrorists, right? So I think there's this is also a hot take, but I think there's a role for that in society. We need to have, there's a reason why it exists, right? There's an evolutionary reason it exists and doesn't go away. There are downsides to it though, and I think in culture we used to have roles for these people, like for example, go raid the Huns or something. I don't know, right? Versus in our modern society, there's not as much of a place for that, and now they all go to politics, but or running open AI perhaps, but
Yeah. Man, it's so interesting to watch. Particularly with the podcast culture. I guess we've always had interviews, and people have always done interviews.
Mm.
So I guess that's not a big difference from before. But man, that Tucker Carlson Sam Altman interview was one of the best interviews I've ever seen on that specific one, on that specific question. And you never know too. This is the going back to the epistemology thing. It's like we don't know about the secret stuff that's been done because it's secret. So we don't know about the intelligence agencies. We don't know all of those things that have happened. We got a lot of information with Snowden, and Whitney Webb has done a great job of correlating all the different things. But it's all correlation because we don't know. And even if we did have a lot of evidence for all these different things, we as human beings are essentially stuck in ignorance just because it's impossible to know anything beyond what you just said about like the knowing whether a coin flip happens. Like, and you have multiple people watching that coin flip, you can all agree, and then you have a recording of the coin flip, then you can, it's like we know what happens, but then then there's the meaning in the interpretation layer, which is so fundamental to who we are that just is not knowable in that sense. What do you think about that epistemology and then meaning layer?
I think as far as like whether or not you know what's going on, the default assumption is you don't know what's going on and you shouldn't think about it too much. Unless you resolve like, hey, I'm going to abandon every piece of a normal life because I'm so motivated to go find out or do something about this, that's cool. But if you aren't, like, I'm a big believer in like do it or don't do it, don't have to do it, right?
Mm.
Like, so for most people, most of the time, almost all thoughts that they spare for political things are a waste of their effort. They actually don't, people like to think about it, people like to care about it, but they don't actually do anything about it. So it's really just like mental masturbation. So as far as the meaning layer, I'm a big proponent. I really like Zen's approach to stuff, which is do what you're doing,
Yeah.
right? Zen, if you summed it up, is literally do whatever you're doing, don't do what you're not doing. So, for example, right now I'm running this company. I help people with their pitches. Okay, cool. I'm doing that. How do I focus on simply doing these things to the best of my ability? That is meaning exists now, right? You get meaning in the present. You know, you can look back and say, oh, I get meaning from these things that I did, but is that like really satisfying? No. Your brain at a certain point is like, okay, cool. You had that cool thing happen. Your little hit of dopamine's gone, right? Hopefully at the end of your life, you did enough things and were present to do a good job that you look back and you're like, I feel like I gave it 100%. But I think a lot of people spend their time thinking about stuff that's never going to happen, stuff that they can do nothing about that already happened, like rather than just how can you do what you're doing and be present at that thing.
Well, and that's the strange thing about being human and relating to other humans, and that autism bit as well, because our models are so different, can be so different from other people, but a lot of times they're the same, and a lot of times because the culture is sort of crashing, the culture is disintegrating in a lot of ways. Those shared models are becoming more and more shaky and fuzzy, and so it's creating a lot of conflict between people, which reminds me about being in Argentina, and how in Argentina they have a lot of political issues and they have a lot of economic issues. Their economic issues are further down the road than the United States. The United States is following in Argentina's pathway in terms of the economic issues. The political climate is the same, but they have national unity in a way that, at least in the coastal cities in New York and San Francisco, you do not feel that national unity, and you don't really feel like a city unity anywhere. It's just like disunity, which is an interesting experience. But what do you think? What do you notice about this? Because you're from Texas originally, right?
I'm originally from Oceanside, California, where I lived till I was like 12, and then we moved to rural North Carolina on the coast till I was like, for another 12 years or so, and then I flitted around. So I've been here for 3 years. I love it here. Texas has Texas. Like Texas is its own thing.
Yeah,
Austin
interesting. It has its own culture
Yeah, but it is like, because it's not the South. You know, I lived in the South. It's not the South. It's also not the Southwest, right? It's its own thing, which I love.
Yep.
I love everything about it. It's great. I love the attitude of people here. It's fundamentally not possible for us to have unity anymore. And it may have been, I don't know, maybe been 70 years since it was possible, because you think what inevitably in a democratic system, groups vote for their interests. If groups don't have the same interests, you cannot have a cohesive aim. And that only gets worse over time. It's the same thing in markets, right? Like when a market centralizes, not because something brings all the broken pieces together, it's that something becomes so good that the other pieces die off. So one of the things I'm talking about, like the real estate market, which is really fragmented in the context of Baseco, think about like phones in 2005, right? There was an infinite number of phones. There are tons of phone companies, right? Flippy phones, twisty phones, slidey phones, camera phones, game phones, brick phones, touch like the BlackBerry with the stylus, all kinds of stuff. When the iPhone comes out, it destroyed the alternative, the validity of alternative phones, and as a consequence, which was once a fragmented market with lots of interesting options. They are now in the U.S. for phone companies that control 96% of the market, with 60% of that being Apple, right? And all phones, with the exception of the new flippy phones, that, the folding touchscreen phones are black rectangles, right? You can change the
Yeah.
color, but they're functionally the same thing. Um, so there's, I called this when I wrote about it, fragmentation and reconciliation. But you could, in design thinking, you would call it divergence and convergence.
Hmm.
There's a bunch that pattern shows up over and over and over again in nature. Like if you look at the, it's called the tree of life, but it's like the speciation of the different like, I forget what the
Oh,
science,
interesting.
but basically, you get over at all markets, all species, whatever, will split, fragment. It's like branches in a tree. One of those branches will be more successful, and that is the branch that the next sets of branches spring from, right? Um, so you can think about this is, people have talked about us becoming a multipolar world. Um, as you move from, let's say, I would say America going to the moon is probably the high water mark, right? I think that was the end of the golden age that the greatest generation created, and then the boomers came in and kind of blew up everything forever, and
Yeah.
they haven't stopped.
Yeah.
But the when that ended, that was also, as kind of postmodern or deconstructionalist or what,
Yep. Yep.
post-structuralist, the French philosophers who were
Yeah.
funded by the CIA,
Yeah.
um, they they started to end the idea of these grand narratives, which are really, as the pitch guy, stories are what people need. Stories are the fundamental
Yeah.
human type.
Interesting.
Right? As we lose those stories, we are not aiming at the same thing anymore. In a multipolar world, you have multiple stories, right? So one of those stories is called BRICS, is going to replace the US dollar, blah, 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 this and that. One of them is
China.
like, oh,
Yeah.
America's going to have a new golden age. One of them is, the like caliphate will rise in the East, whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
Never talk about the Buddha. They never talk about the Buddha coming and unifying everything.
yeah, they're pretty chill about it. Although there are like, this boggles my mind, and maybe it's just because I always had a high opinion of Buddhists, but like there is like a Buddhist militia that's like
Yeah.
doing crazy stuff somewhere in Southeast Asia. But it's always funny that Westerners think that Buddhism is like, oh, it's not a religion, it's blah blah blah. It's like,
Yeah.
no, it definitely is, just not the version that you're getting from the San Francisco hippies.
Yeah, it was the
Like,
Protestants, the San Francisco's late stage Protestant secularism that
yeah,
culturally appropriated Buddhism and then told everyone that they're culturally appropriating everything.
well, the irony
Yeah.
was, did you ever read Autobiography of a Yogi?
Yep. Mhm.
His job, his guru was like, hey, your job is to go to America
Yeah.
and make everyone do yoga, and you're never going to come back. And then he did. And then later people were like, well, you're appropriate. It's like, no, that's why he brought it here. Like that was his,
Yeah, interesting.
So it's funny. Nobody knows what they're talking about, but it's true in all cases.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, so I don't know. I think it's multipolar, right? However, look at Dune as the best example of this, like the popularity of the Dune movie, which is I find hilarious because both Frank Herbert, who couldn't decide, which is why like the first two books he was like Paul's the bad guy, and then he's like, but wait, but what if he finished the job? And then his son is like more Paul, and it's very clear that like he loves the concept of this, but he feels bad about it. And then they make the movie, and they're like, no, Paul's the bad guy, but you're like, damn, Paul's the coolest person ever. They made him so cool. But the popularity of that, like, think about what is the premise of Dune is it's supposed to be that they faked this narrative. They made Paul, right? He was
Interesting.
supposed to do it. But in reality, it's like it's out of the hands of them who are trying to fake this narrative, and he unites the people like that. He in this like very nihilistic-y sort of like space opera world where everyone's power hungry and whatever. He gives them this sense of meaning, and he kind of accepts like I have to do this, and it brings the people together, which is why that movie is just so successful because the people yearn for that, right? The people yearn for this big, giant, beautiful story and for this all to make sense because we're, whatever, 50, 60 years deep into grand narratives aren't real. Everything's subjective, right? It's like, no, it's not. Everyone loves death.
This goes into something I think a lot about, and I don't have any good answers here. The story in my head is that we're entering the decentralization. Other people have called it the patchwork age. There's two different thinkers who have both come to agree on the same word to use it. Very different thinkers who I don't think ever heard of each other. Both call it the Patchwork Age. The Rand Corporation wrote a great paper on it about how we're entering neo-feudalism and neo-medievalism in 2006, around that time. So all the planners have thought about it for a long time. And just like, it's going away. Everything that we know of, not in the supply chains, it feels like supply chains aren't going away anytime soon, but culturally, as you discussed, and I agree with you, the United States can't unify to the same degree that it did within the 1960s. Like, it's just, doesn't feel like it's going to happen. So it all goes away. But you just talked about this grand narrative and like a Butlerian jihad, although that was the thing that happened before that created the Dune universe, which is funny because the machines took over and they had to fight all the machines and destroy them. But like grand narrative are, from what you just said, it sounds like there's a great sort of, it could happen where there people, I guess that was what happened in COVID. In 2020, in March 2020, that was the last grand narrative, I would say. It was a false one. It was a delusional one from my perspective of what was going on. But that was like the only time that the world has ever been fully united on an action, which was locking down and taking a vax. That is feels like the last time it will ever be united again. Do you think
It's, I think that was the last time that the legacy media / the institutional machine had the power to do that, right?
Yeah.
That was the last flex of like
Yeah.
like when you boil like a frog and it like convulses, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you put salt water on it and it like tenses out. That was that, right? That was
Yeah.
the last flex of the dying thing.
Yeah.
I think what we saw, and I think if you look at, let's say, like 2016, 2020, 2024 was called, hey, here's we're gonna use social media and go against the mainstream. Okay, cool. Now the media is striking back, and that was 2020.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, cool. Well, we bought Twitter now, and now it's ours. So what you see with the transition towards away from 60 Minutes towards like Rogan and Friends, from the New York Times towards Twitter, those sorts of things reflect that the power center is moving, right? Or rather, the legacy institutions have lost their ability to maintain their grip on the power, probably through abuse, loss of public trust. So what ultimately history is written by the victors, right? So where right now we're in the flux of it, it's not clear who's winning or losing. If power is unfortunately a zero-sum game, right? People don't think this most of the time, which is why, for example, like the libertarians basically never win elections, because they are like, oh, well, what if we just did things right? Then we should just get rewarded for that. It's like, well, you guys don't win elections. You don't actually get any say, right? Unless you're Milei in Argentina.
Yeah, that's the first libertarian elected since the president of Botswana in the 50s. So we have no data on it, essentially. And then there's other things we could talk about, but I want to hear what you were going to say.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's just a testament to like the exception proves the rule. But he said, he was just in an interview and he said, no, power is a zero-sum game. You have to understand that before you can actually play the game correctly.
He's been consistent on that as well since before he got elected as well.
Yeah, I mean, he unlike everyone else in the Libertarian Party, and as someone that in COVID times, it was like 2019, 2020 or so. I was a chapter leader for an organization, a nonprofit called America's Future, which is like a pseudo libertarian young professionals networking thing. And in the process of doing that, it was really cool. Met a lot of great people, learned a lot of stuff. But I was like, man, I get it. They don't understand the way this works.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting.
Very nice people. They're all very moral and upstanding. And I really like them as people. Institutionally, they just don't get what's happening. Right. They don't understand the nature of the game. So I think as we move into, and you're seeing this more where this is something where I think traditionally the left has an extremely good grasp on this notion. Like it's baked in there, like realpolitik, like, hey, there's only what works. There's only what you can get done, right? If you accept that it's not about what you want, it's not about what should happen. There's only, hey, can you get elected? Can you get your people and your policies in place? Okay, cool. You're seeing more of that now where the right is kind of learning this. And I think a lot of this people like, if you look, I think a major part of the last election was these disaffected, kind of like Bay Area leftish libertarian sorts that, people have called gray tribe that have
Yeah.
moved over
RFK
towards
Jr.
right. Yeah, it's a great example. Or like Tulsi or like, um, where they're like, hey, this other thing's not working. I understand that the third party's not an option and they're not doing it. Like, and they're fundamentally different. Whereas, if you think about like, I don't know, 2004 to, 2000, what the people on the right were like the hardcore evangelicals and stuff like that. And it was very like, it was very uncool.
Mhm.
So now you have these kind of split things on the same side where they're occupying the same aisle, but are fundamentally different in nature, right? There's like
Mhm.
this lingering sort of the evangelical right. Now you have the gray tribe pseudo right that people have called it the new right. And nobody says alt right anymore. That was kind of like a flash in the pan, but it's different than that. It's like the tech right almost, but
Yeah. Yeah. Tech
um,
right. I call it the psychedelic right, but feel like
yeah,
yeah, the shaman guy with the like that guy. He's a good example of it. But
or like
it
Peter
feels like it's
Thiel.
breaking down. Peter Thiel is
What's
another.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he represents the whole cohort for me. I think and a
Mm,
lot of the other people like Mark Andreessen, people that came on, Peter Thiel's been doing this for a long time. He was very far, as always, very far ahead of the curve.
yep.
I think he accurately predicted the way things were going. Um, and it's ultimately like the incentive structure wise, like you think if you live in the Bay and you're a tech founder, you at a certain point, like imagine you're Zuckerberg or Bezos or somebody, you have to acknowledge like this is really voting against my interests here, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
so what
Yeah.
everything's incentives in the long run at scale, right? There individuals can override their incentives. The organizations or people at scale cannot, right? If I say,
Mm,
hey, every time you walk in this room, I'm gonna tase you. Maybe if you really want to get in that room, you could do it, but like the average person is gonna get tased 0 or 1
yeah.
times, right? And then they're not gonna go in that room anymore.
Man, that we could talk a lot about. There's a great debate that I think you personally would like, but anybody listening to this as well, between David Graeber and Peter Thiel, and it was in 2006 or 2013, somewhere before it all changed. And Peter Thiel and David Graeber at that time were complete opposites. David Graeber wrote the book Bullshit Jobs, and he also wrote a book called Debt. Great interview, but he's an anarchist and he's studied the anthropologists, or he's an anthropologist and an anarchist, and more on the leftist anarchist, whereas Millay is a anarcho-capitalist, which is a whole other type of anarchy. So great, but anthropology goes into, like, you just mentioned something that really makes me think about anthropology and like the tribal nature. And it just, like, my view on where we're headed is that it is all fracturing, it's all decentralizing. Grand narratives will like spark through the consciousness, but then they'll disappear really quickly because there's nothing to hold on to them. And so the whole political structure is going to fracture. And like, yeah, the right is in power right now, but they've also lost a huge amount of legitimacy because there's campaign promises that were made that were not, like, uh, and this is where the other patchwork age theorist, what's his name, the guy who created Urbit,
Yarvin.
yeah,
Well,
Yarvin, where, well, maybe Trump becomes a king, and that's where the no kings protest, because they caught on to it. So but like, I think it's all going to fracture, and I think AI will play a really important role in fracturing it, because now the leverage you get from AI is huge if you're using it correctly and you don't get caught into the delusion of thinking it's conscious, or that we're creating a god of any sort. But yeah, what do you think of that?
it's everything's cyclical, right? So there's the Greeks called it the kyklos or the cycle.
Interesting.
In there's an Islamic philosophy of history book called the Muqaddimah, written by Ibn Khaldun, which is pretty awesome. Although it's funny because the first, like, the intro, he's like, "We will begin this our study of history. Of course, we will account for the fact that we know in the past that people believed crazy things, like, you know, the sun dies every day and is born again. But of course, today we know such things that man must live on the surface because he is warm, and fish must live in the water because they are cold. Or and you can't go into caves because you'll die, or just like so. You just said something insane. So like with that caveat being that like it's one of the funniest things I've ever read in my life. Really cool book. He talks about this a similar 4-part cycle, which most people today, if they know about this, will know this is like the fourth turning or the fourth turning, right? But everyone, and pretty much everyone that's ever done philosophy of history has agreed that this thing exists. I like the kyklos the most. I think it's the easiest to understand. But basically, you get at first a good king, right? So monarchy ruled by one. People think monarchy means something other than monos archos, single power, right?
Interesting.
The good king becomes a tyrant. Then you get aristocracy, which is ruled by the excellent Aristos, right? That's like Socrates' excellence, ruled by the best, right? So then you have, the bad king had a bunch of good advisors, but then they become an oligarchy, and it's just like money and power and whatever. They get overthrown by the people, so you get democracy, which at first is this sort of like, class conscious rebellion, and everyone's smart. And that devolves into populism and demagoguery and nonsense, which then turns into anarchy, which is a transitory state, and then a new monarchy asserts itself, right? So this is basically every single thing in history. Like look at the both parts of the Roman the Roman Empire, Roman Republic. This is always what happens. So the technically, if you think like the U.S. Really was an aristocratic rebellion against a monarch, in essence, right? And even like think about what people think we're a democracy. We're a republic. We're really a republic at the beginning, which is ultimately aristocracy, right?
Yep.
So where are we now? We have moved much further towards becoming a democracy, such that people talk about the American democracy. It's like it was always a republic. The founders hated democracy. The Greeks had democracy for a very short time, and it caused infinite problems. Everyone in history was like, this is the worst possible system you can have, right? My favorite example is someone who has experienced this firsthand. If you ever try to do design by committee, oh boy, you will get the worst possible outcome. Look at Austin's logo, right? Austin City logo got a bunch of like crap. It's terrible, and it cost like $10 million and took years for them to make a very mediocre logo you could have gotten on Canva for $50, right? Because it was designed by committee. What you realize working in teams, right? As someone myself, there you go. But first off, the original, by the way, has a bunch of things. So like the yellow is the color of Austin yellow sandstone, and I forget what the other ones are. I looked this up a while ago, but it's all intentional. It's all very specific. It looks like a city seal, and then the new one is like, it would be a great logo for a DNA company whose name starts with an A.
Yeah,
right?
Interesting.
But like, it's not even shaped like the river in town, right?
I love the lamp. I love the lamp with the light.
Yeah, because it's like leading the way. It's like there's all kinds of symbolism. I like the old timey stuff like that a lot. Especially for, like imagine if somebody redesigned the dollar to look like it was a SaaS company. It would be terrible. The dollar works because it has all the magical little geometry stuff
Probably
in there.
Probably what Biden would have done.
God, don't even get me started. But so the thing that people don't understand, I think it's largely because in every other system in the world, the average person would not be asked about their opinion. Similarly, like does, in a family, does mom and dad ask somebody that lives 3 states away how they should raise their kids? No, that's crazy. Everyone knows that's crazy, right? Does the person driving the car ask the person in the backseat how they should drive the car? No, we all have a phrase for that because we know that's dumb and annoying, right? Yeah. So in practice, everyone knows that every version of that system is stupid and bad. And we have many, many infinite numbers of phrases describing it in all circumstances, right? Peanut gallery, right?
Yeah.
There's tons.
Shit show.
Yeah. Chaos. I don't know. But so it stands to be seen. Regardless of what anyone thinks, I certainly don't think Trump has the will to be the king.
Yeah,
so that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
He's ultimately a true populist. He genuinely
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
wants to do what people want him to do. Like that if you look at whenever people get mad, he changes.
Yeah.
That is in a functioning. Okay, I was about to say an oxymoron. In a
Yeah.
democracy, that is theoretically what you want, is a politician who believes nothing and does whatever people want them to do. No, think about it. Like, what are they
Yeah.
elected to do, right? They're elected to represent you. They should have
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
ones,
Yeah.
right?
Interesting.
And you're like, wow, they're unprincipled. Like, yeah, that's what the system's supposed to do, right? If you have, like, if, for example, if I'm Ron Paul, who is the opposite, who has not changed his belief system ever,
Mm.
who I respect and think is one
Yeah.
of the best to ever
Interesting.
do it, um, he is not what you ideally are actually voting for in a politician, because we think that, oh, well, when they'll get in, they'll think about me. It's like he would just do what he was going to do anyway, right? That's
Mm.
not, democracy doesn't optimize for that. Democracy optimizes for who can market the most effectively and who can represent whatever they're asked to do the most effectively. Now the catch is that their constituents are also lobbyists and big corporations and
Yeah.
foreign governments, perhaps,
Yeah.
right?
Mom Dami.
So yeah, dude, tell me about it. So, well, hey, they get what they voted for, right?
Yeah.
We'll see.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right,
But
but
and that for the last 5 minutes or so, that feels like is gonna what you just said is gonna merge into both technology and more local politics. Because I don't think politics is gonna get more national. Like it feels like, at least in the United States, where we do have this system, and there are these levels of government that people are going to pay more attention to their local government, because that's definitely, I mean, the boomers were good at they're like they would all vote and they would all get active locally and stuff like that. Feels like that's probably going to come back, but with less opportunity for the news, the TV news to tell them what to do, which like it's gonna get. It feels like it's gonna get very interesting politically speaking. I liked where you said the democracy is. We're at the democracy stage now, and that's definitely happening in New York, but we're not at the return to a king stage. And this is always the craziest thing of like where we are on the Rome timeline. Are we right? Like it doesn't feel like, I agree with you. I don't think Trump is actually after that term. I think he jokes about it, but after like the third term, I don't think there's going to be any sort of like coup or anything like that. It just doesn't feel like that's going to happen. And that, that's the Caesar example. That's what they always talk about. Well, Caesar took power, or he crossed the Rubicon, and he went and took power, and that's when Rome transitioned from a republic into an empire. And like, where are we on that? Like our like, because it's not a direct map. We had the Confederacy. One of the craziest things I learned recently is that the Ben Franklin took the Iroquois. That's how we get federalism, is he looked at what the Iroquois were going through, and then he basically brought that with what Polybius said. And Polybius was the guy who figured out about the Greeks, and it's like, oh, I don't want any of that going on again. But yeah, it just feels like where we're at is both the same thing as everything that's ever happened, but also it's very different, particularly with the technology part.
yeah, well, they say, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
Mm-hmm.
I I have there's an article I read at some point that was I call it the spiral theory of history, because
Mm.
people say, oh, well, either history is progressive, it's the
Yeah,
forward
yeah,
march of
yeah.
history is a model, or people are like history's cyclical because it goes in these cycles. It's like, okay, well, what if you draw a cycle moving forward through time? Well, now you have a spiral, right?
Mm.
If you look at a spiral from the side, you have a sine wave, right? So it's just fun. That applies to everything. It's really fun to just pattern match that too much, get real schizo about it. But um, so I think we are in something that is cyclical. Like there are defined phases, and there are reasons that each of these lead to each other. And historians in every age, different places that never talk to each other, all arrive at the same stuff. That's probably true, right? Um, Yarvin asked the question, are we at the end of the Roman Empire, in which case we're dead, or are we at the end of the Roman
Mm.
Republic, in which case we're about to get the Roman Empire? It's unclear, right? I think, Vance might do it. We'll see.
Yeah,
Vance,
interesting.
people people are sleeping on him. He has the best instincts of anyone. He knows exactly how to play the bass. He's very low key about it. Like,
Interesting.
we'll see. But this is realistically, decentralization is a falling apart, right? When people look at all the crypto people are like, oh yeah, we're gonna have
Yeah,
DAOs. It's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
you know what you should have? You should have perfect direct democracy, right?
Yeah,
That,
interesting.
that works really well. Like try that out. Notice these DAOs very rarely accomplish anything at all, right? Except perhaps defrauding their token
Yeah,
buyers.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I don't. The push towards decentralization is a misguided frustration with the existing centralized power. It's not actually a move towards fixing it, although it is a step, right? That impulse is directed wrong. And so when there is the decentralizing that's going on, which is just entropy, it's falling apart, right? Eventually somebody in there will say, oh, wait, but what if I put all this stuff together again, right? So power centralizes, right? Power has gravity. So that which acquires power acquires more power. On the Sam Altman note, just because I wanted to throw this in earlier, I forgot. Paul Graham, who worked with him at YC, said Sam Altman's the best in the world at one thing, acquiring power, which is a crazy thing to say about someone you worked with.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting.
But in that regard, look at that. Well, he's the best at it. What did he do? He continues to acquire power. He's pitched a
Literal
trillion
power.
dollar
Yeah, yeah,
valuation.
yeah.
Stupid nonsense. It's like a person with a brain can say that's not sustainable. There's enough market in the world for them to capture that, right? We'll see. But similarly, right? It centralizes, it decentralizes. They had OpenAI had 60 something percent of the market share, which you can maintain, by the way. Look at Coke. Coke has had like 60 or 70% of the soda market for 100 years, right? Because they maintain their brand really well and they didn't destroy it. And maybe they're getting a little worse right now because they started introducing bullshit. But if you notice, people that are standouts in their industry can maintain a disproportionate and unusual size of market share. OpenAI is not succeeding in that, right? They're losing market share to others because the market will fragment, right? And generally what happens is that when the leader loses it, nobody else becomes necessarily the leader in the way the original was. So if Coke fell apart, Pepsi doesn't get 70% of the market share. Pepsi and then others now will have more than they had before, but there's more fragmentation in the market, right? Markets rarely centralize unless a novel thing creates a new market that destroys the old market, right? So like light bulbs destroy the candle market, and then candles get repurposed as something that costs 100 times as much for a novelty item that smells good instead of something used to light your house, right? So if you apply this to politics, right, either there is a massive meaning a new market that we restructure the nature of this thing because most likely it falls apart. There is some sort of a civil or international conflict that leads towards an appetite for more extreme approaches to problem solving that frankly, I think that appetite exists on both sides, but it doesn't exist en masse and it doesn't exist at the top. Although, for example, like New York has the appetite and has just voted for it in one regard, right? Yeah. So we'll see how that plays out because that was what they voted for. They voted for crazy change, right?
Yeah, interesting.
They voted for radical change, right?
Yeah.
I won't even assign a moral position to that. It's what mine is, but like that's what they think they're getting something different than Cuomo, right? That's fair. Probably they want that. Cuomo seems like he also sucks, right? I don't know.
Why do we have such bad choices? That's the key question.
Yeah, and this is the thing. This is like if you, for example, you teleported back to time travel back to like 1776, every single living human being in that time frame in America would be considered to be so extremely far right by today's standards. It would be inconceivable, right? However, the thing that creates the left, or the desire, let's say the desire for radical progress, change, something different, is the failure of the conserving force of addressing their concerns, right? So for example, if I'm like the factory owner and I don't care that the working conditions are terrible, right? Guess what? You created an environment where unions can come in, right? Okay,
Yeah.
now fast forward 100 years,
Yeah.
having unions probably makes, your workers might get paid $30 an hour at the lowest, but also now your factory's not competitive, and now you have no jobs left in America because we outsourced it to a place where they're actually at par market value.
Yeah.
But that happened in the first place because if you are the leader, if you have the power, the responsibility, you have what we used to talk about, noblesse oblige,
Yeah.
which is like the obligation of the nobles to take care of their people.
Yeah.
But a lot of the real aristocracy died in World War One, right? Because they went to go fight, and the ones that didn't are the people that
Man,
run.
that's a wild thing we're not gonna have time for. You just say is like all the aristocrats, because they were fighting the 18th century and 19th century war, where it's like you go prove your honor by going to fight, and they all got killed, uh,
Yeah.
which is crazy. Uh, Thank you so much for coming on the show. Go find Garrett Daly, the CEO of Lucid Consulting. Where's the best place people can follow you?
Um, if you're listening to this, probably on Twitter.
Yeah.
So just I think my handle is at Garrett C Daly, GarrettCdaily. I post some more fun stuff there if you want more stuff about pitching.
Yep, it's funny because we
I
didn't
don't
get
post
into
as
it.
much
Yeah.
anymore, but that's on LinkedIn. Yeah, that'd probably be it.
Cool. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure.